Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
The Syrian people, both inside and outside Syria, continue to suffer acutely from the conflict in all its dimensions. And the absence of a genuine political process is deeply detrimental to their well-being. One latest indicator of suffering is a further collapsing economy. A very bad economic situation has got even worse. In some 3 months, the Syrian pound has lost over 80% of its value. Last week, it hit an all-time low of 15,500 to the US dollar at the unofficial market rate. Remember that in 2011, the Syrian pound was 47 to the dollar. Prices are now spiraling out of control for essentials goods such as food, medicine, fuel, basic commodities. Every part of Syria, every community is affected. Many are struggling to provide meals to their families. We take note of some of the steps taken to respond to this sudden deterioration, including doubling minimum state salaries to roughly $13 a month. And yet, a monthly food basket in June cost at least $81 according to the World Food Programme, a figure that has gone up by roughly 70% in just a year, and is no doubt higher now in late August. These trends speak for themselves. Madam President, the tragic reality is that for as long violent conflict continues and the political process is blocked, the suffering of the Syrian people will simply get worse. Syria cannot fix its economy while it is in a state of conflict. And this applies to the many other crises that ravage Syria. The crisis of displacement, of the detained, abducted, and missing, of human rights abuses, of terrorism, of hostilities and violent conflict, of the de facto division of Syria, undermining its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Only with movement on Security Council Resolution 2254, addressing the political crisis at the heart of the conflict, can we begin to address the many crises afflicting this country. Even starting with some incremental steps on the Resolution 2254 could create a floor beneath this unsustainable freefall and instigate a process of trust building and healing. Madam President, let me echo the Secretary General in welcoming the understanding reached on the continued use for the next 6 months of the Bab al-Hawa border crossing to deliver life-saving humanitarian assistance to millions of people in need in northwest Syria. I also welcome the extension of authorization for the UN to use the Bab al-Salam and al-Rai border crossings for an additional 3 months, as well as consent to cross the lines within Syria at Sarmada and Sarakib for the delivery of assistance for the next 6 months. It is indeed essential that the UN and its partners continue providing cross-border humanitarian assistance at the necessary scale and in a principled manner that allows engagement with all parties for the purposes of seeking humanitarian access and in a manner that safeguards the UN's operational independence. We also need a redoubled effort to secure sufficient humanitarian resources at a time when funding is more stretched than ever. This year's humanitarian response plan is funded at 25%, and the regional refugee and resilience plan at roughly 10%. We need support for all pillars, including enhancing early recovery in the humanitarian response plan and for refugees and host countries. It remains critical that any adverse effects of sanctions that could aggravate the predicament of ordinary Syrians be avoided and mitigated. The full use of existing humanitarian exemptions and active engagement by sanctioned states to counter overcompliance are essential. Madam President, we must not forget that despite a broad military statement since March 2020, the violent conflict continues, causing civilian deaths and destruction on all sides in Syria. This last month saw airstrikes attributed to Israel near Damascus, reports of pro-government airstrikes in northwest Syria, an area which also saw attacks, including attempted drone attacks by listed terrorist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham on Syrian government positions, as well as frontline clashes and exchanges of artillery. Attacks claimed by ISIL during the Ashura commemoration near the Sayyida Zainab shrine, and later on a bus carrying Syrian government forces near Al-Mayadin. Reports of strikes on US military base in Deir ez-Zor, reports on Turkish drone strikes in north and northeast Syria, an SDF attack on a Turkish military base in Assas, reports of clashes between factions in areas under the control of SDF, reports of clashes and tensions in the south in Dara, Tafaz and Shweida, and a strike by the international coalition on the radical group Hurras al-Din in Al-Bab. Madam President, I continue to call for a genuine and sustained calm that all key Syrian and international players work to support so as to build a nationwide ceasefire. A cooperative approach to addressing the real threat posed by proscribed terrorist groups and full respect for international humanitarian law. The central importance of protecting civilians and upholding international law was brought home again by the dark commemoration this past week of 10 years since the shocking chemical weapons attacks in the suburbs of Damascus. Madam President, as you know, at present it is difficult to see that conditions are in place to bring about a comprehensive settlement of the conflict. But, and I emphasize this, I strongly believe that the status quo is untenable and that there are things that can be done to advance the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2254. I welcome the fact that reconvening the Constitutional Committee is a clear point of consensus among many key actors. It is important that the committee resume, continue, deepen, and gradually build some trust and move forward on substance, a first move of many. I and my team are fully engaged in the efforts to unblock the impasse and find a way forward on substance and working methods. During the reporting period, the Arab Contact Group met in Cairo with the Syrian Foreign Minister, and they expressed their aspiration to see the next meeting of the Constitutional Committee in the Sultanate of Oman with UN facilitation before the end of the year. This is one of a number of alternative venues that have been suggested for the Constitutional Committee. Let me stress that I continue to seek to facilitate consensus to overcome the issues that have prevented the Constitutional Committee from meeting in Geneva and to ensure that it resumes and makes credible progress. Earlier today, I spoke with the Syrian Foreign Minister as well as with the head of the Syrian Negotiations Commission, and I look forward to continue these discussions. I also look forward to briefing the Middle Third civil society participants on any consensus that may emerge. Madam President, let me just add that I continue to welcome enhanced attention from the region on Syria. In the last few days, I have spoken with the foreign ministers of Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, and had contact with senior Turkish officials. I will, of course, continue to work with the Arab players, the Astana players, and the Western players too, all of whom have contributions to make towards supporting a Syrian-owned and Syrian-led political process. It's a simple fact of Syria that no one actor or group of actors can determine the outcome of the conflict or bring about the kind of steps needed for a political solution to emerge. This political solution will only be possible with steps from a broad range of different players and genuine verification too. Madam President, the political process must be much more than just the Constitutional Committee, as you all well know. I have long sought to bring about movement incrementally towards a safe, calm, and neutral environment in Syria, something that obviously overlaps heavily with the question of refugees and the internally displaced. This was also an issue highlighted when the Arab Contact Group met last week. It remains to be seen whether the Syrian government is ready to do more to address the very real and continuing protection concerns. And for their part, donors could do more to address the concerns all Syrians have about basic services and livelihoods. A step-for-step dynamic here could begin to change realities on the ground for all Syrians, including the displaced, and also build confidence and political space for a broader set of issues related to Resolution 2254. The close coordination of the Syrian authorities with the United Nations will be a cornerstone in this regard. Madam President, earlier this month, I had the pleasure of having an in-depth exchange with the Truth and Justice Charter representatives, who have been among the key drivers towards the UN General Assembly's decision to create the independent institution of missing persons in Syria. For these families and victims, the decision is a bittersweet milestone. It underlines the momentous scale of the problem. Tens of thousands of men, women, and children are detained or missing, with ongoing abductions and arbitrary detentions still happening across the country. They told me how families continue to learn about their loved ones' deaths in custody only when civil registry records are updated, after having waited years with hopes of seeing their loved ones return. On previous occasions, they also relayed the risks of persecution and harassment and extortion that they face in their struggle to seek information about their loved ones. Syrians have the right to be provided full and transparent information about the fate and whereabouts of the detained and missing. Madam President, we will continue to consult widely on this and other issues with Syrian civil society and Syrian women, including through the Civil Society Support Room and the Women's Advisory Board, to ensure that their legitimate aspirations are understood and ultimately met. I'm also pleased to report to you that the process of seeking new members of the Syrian Women's Advisory Board through a process of rotation has begun, and we look forward to concluding this process in the coming months. Existing members of the VAN have provided sound advice, and I remain extremely grateful for their efforts. Madam President, it is deeply troubling that for over a year, the intra-Syrian political process has been in deep freeze. The political process is the right of the Syrian people. They are entitled to chart their own destiny. And the political process is a necessity. Syria is a country and people that remains divided. There is no military victory on the horizon for any one actor. And the terrible effects of conflict continue to cascade across the region. We are all paying a heavy price for this conflict, but first and foremost the Syrian people, most of whom have lost close to everything in this last decade, but also the region and the international community at large. And as international attention and funding for Syria wane, the situation will become even more unsustainable. Madam President, the only path out of this is a political process that involves the Syrian parties themselves in line with the Security Council Resolution 2254. Thank you so much.
Everyone, happy Wednesday, I guess, if there is such a thing. Okay, well, good afternoon. First things first, housekeeping note. Once I'm finished here, you will hear from the permanent representative of India to these United Nations, Ambassador Ruchira Kambosh. He will be here to talk about India's mission to the moon, which is very exciting. I'm sure you've all heard of it today in the news. We, of course, congratulate India on being the first country to land a spacecraft on the south pole of the moon. This is a great achievement, which was watched by many people around the world. As you know, this organization has a very keen interest in space, particularly in the peaceful uses of outer space, and we wish India a greater success in its space exploration. So you'll be able to ask him all about it after we're done here. So today in South Africa, the Secretary General arrived a few minutes ago in Johannesburg, where the BRICS summit is being held. This evening, he will attend a dinner hosted by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Tomorrow, the Secretary General, at the invitation of the BRICS, as a reminder, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, he will be participating in the BRICS Africa Outreach and BRICS Plus Dialogue sessions. And those sessions will be broadcasted live on our webcast feed. And prior to flying back to New York, he will be holding a press briefing, which will also be webcast. And I believe it's at around 2 p.m. local time. In the council earlier this morning, the Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, briefed council members. He said that the Syrian people, both inside and outside the country, continue to suffer acutely from the conflict in all of its dimensions, and the absence of a genuine political process is deeply detrimental to their well-being. He added that a political process is the right of the Syrian people, and the only path out of the crisis is a political process that involves the Syrian parties themselves, in line with Resolution 2254. And his full remarks were shared with you. And just to note that this afternoon, the Security Council will hold close consultations on Myanmar. And we have a humanitarian update for you from Niger, where we, along with our partners, continue to deliver assistance across the country. In Tahua, in the country's southwest, humanitarians have provided medical care, reproductive health services, and nutrition to over 1,000 people through mobile clinics. And last week, the World Food Programme started food distribution to more than 9,000 refugees from Mali, also in the southwest. However, our humanitarian colleagues are warning about the consequences of the ongoing crisis on the humanitarian situation. Significant amounts of urgent medical supplies, nutritious food, equipment, and food stocks are stranded in neighboring countries, and airspace closure affects movements in and out of Niger. Our colleagues are stressing that humanitarian exemptions from border and air closure sanctions are urgently required to allow humanitarian stocks to be replenished. And we also have an update on the floods in the country. About 88,000 people across the country have been impacted by these floods, with the Maradi region being the most impacted. We are ramping up the response and distributing sanitation kits and shelter items while assessments in newly affected areas continue. Heavy rains are forecasted to continue for the coming weeks, and this is expected to increase water levels in rivers, including in the capital, Niamey. Turning to Mali, our peacekeeping colleagues tell us that yesterday, a MINUSMA convoy came under a direct attack from unidentified armed individuals while it was en route from Gao to Menaka. The armed assailants fired shots from a distance at the convoy before retreating. Fortunately, there were no casualties among peacekeepers, and the convoy, which was supporting the withdrawal of the mission, reached its destination without any further issue. This is the second such incident in a week of this nature. This latest attack is another reminder of the challenges the mission faces as it withdraws from the country at the request of the Malian authorities and pursuant to Council Resolution 2690. The mission is nearing the completion of implementing Phase 1 of its withdrawal plan, which entails the closure and handover of the farthest and smallest bases to the transition government. And over the past week, the mission has closed bases in Ogosagu, Bear, and Gunman, with Menaka to follow next. And as we've said before, the safety of our peacekeepers will remain a priority throughout this process. Staying in the region, in Sudan, our humanitarian colleagues tell us they're warning that civilian displacement is continuing at an alarming scale as the conflict spreads to new areas. The number of people who have fled the fighting has now topped 4.5 million. The International Organization for Migration says that more than 3.6 million people are internally displaced. That's almost 169,000 of them in the last week alone. Meanwhile, the UN Refugee Agency reports that nearly 950,000 refugees, asylum seekers, and returnees have sought safety outside Sudan, mostly in Chad, Egypt, and South Sudan. And as hostilities continue, hunger is also on the rise. WFP says that it has now reached 1.8 million people with food assistance since the conflict erupted in mid-April. But that's still less than 10% of the 20.3 million people who are facing acute hunger. The agency is aiming to reach some 6.7 million by the end of the year. However, access challenges and insecurity are hampering their efforts. In the Central African Republic, our peacekeeping colleagues inform us that starting next week, they will assist the authorities in the holding of the second criminal session of the Bangui Court of Appeal. Strengthening the rule of law and essential criminal justice services are one of the tasks that the mission is helping with towards fighting impunity, preventing conflict, and laying the foundations for peace in the country. The mission's support to the court will extend to several areas, including security, transporting people under trial to the courtroom under safe conditions, as well as protecting victims and witnesses, particularly in cases of sexual violence. And now going to Ukraine, the humanitarian coordinator, Denise Brown, has condemned a new wave of attacks on nearly half of Ukraine's regions over the past 24 hours. According to local authorities, grain storage facilities, vital for farmers and global food security, have been hit in the Danube area. In the Sumy region, a school was damaged and teachers were killed and injured, according to national authorities. Our partners on the ground tell us that in the Kherson region, civilians endured hours of relentless strikes that damaged a hospital and forced aid organizations to suspend vital assistance and take shelter during the day. And that was yesterday. Finally, we have, I'm sure you've seen reports that Tropical Storm Franklin made landfall along the southern coast of the Dominican Republic this morning, bringing torrential rains to the country and to neighboring Haiti. We are working with national and regional partners, including the Caribbean Emergency Disaster Agency, to prepare for potential impacts of the storm. And the Haiti Civil Protection Agency has disseminated precautionary measures to the population. We are mapping available stocks and resources with our partners and have also pre-positioned sheltered materials in several areas in the country, especially the ones that are expected to be hit the most. However, our colleagues are also warning that insecurity in the regions affected by gang violence might create access challenges. For its part, the World Food Program is working to plan for potential humanitarian food needs and has also pre-positioned 120 metric tons of food in newly constructed operations base in Maragon. And finally, today is the International Day for the Remembrance of the Slave Trade and its abolition. The Secretary General noted that the impact of the slave trade remains visible in today's racial injustices and inequalities, and he underscored that ending slavery's legacy of racism is a global imperative. And there is no quiz today because we got no money today. So with that, I will do my best to answer your questions. Edie.
Thank you very much. The Taliban has banned girls who have been awarded scholarships to study in the United Arab Emirates from boarding planes to go to Dubai. Does the Secretary General have any comment on this denial of education?
I mean, I think we've been pretty clear on this issue. We recently had various people come to brief you about the second anniversary, marking the second year that the Taliban has been systematically taking rights away from women and girls. And education is one of those essential rights that is crucial and that women are entitled to, and are not just entitled to, but they are owed as part of their human rights. And that also affects not just them individually, but the whole country as a society. And I think what we will continue to be doing is to call on the de facto authorities to uphold their obligations under international law. And we will continue to advocate for the rights of women, because Afghanistan cannot develop with their full participation. And it's really heartbreaking that women who are wanting to exercise these rights are being prevented from doing so. Yes, Kirsten.
You said that just some clarification on the SG's movements at the BRICS summit. You said there's a 2 p.m. local time that would be tomorrow, obviously, I guess, 2 p.m. press conference.
Tomorrow, yeah. So he just landed today.
Yeah.
Tomorrow he will be speaking at the session, and that is happening. I can tell you.
Could you mention what the sessions were again?
Yes. So he will be talking at the BRICS Africa Outreach and BRICS Plus Dialogue. This is all scheduled to happen between 9 and 12 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. local time. And I think you can already go on webcast and see that there's a link for those.
Okay.
And then the press briefing is actually, I think I said 2 p.m., but it's actually 1:50. So 10 minutes before 1:50 p.m. tomorrow local time.
In South Africa, okay.
Yes.
And my actual question is, the Secretary General has called for revamping the financial system, called for a new Bretton Woods and so on. Does he support BRICS efforts to reduce reliance on the U.S. dollar? And is that something that he's going to be talking about when he's there?
I think his message has been very clear on these restructuring. While he might not get into the nitty-gritty at this granularity, and obviously he wouldn't tell blocks of countries what to do, what he has been asking for is for a more an international financial system that is actually fair and that gives access to finance to a lot of countries that are missing out of it and that really need it. All these middle-income countries, least developed countries that really need debt financing and that need financing for issues like the climate crisis or issues that transitioning to renewables. So I think the general message is the system needs to change. And he has been clear about that for a long time. I'm sure he will reiterate that while he's there, but I wouldn't go into the more specifics of how countries go about it.
In terms of the promoting local currencies as the new development bank is calling for or planning to do and promoting, has he taken a position on that?
Nothing to add at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Yvonne.
Thank you. My question is on whether the Secretary General has any response to the Brazilian President Lula da Silva's comments at BRICS in which he said that Russia's war against Ukraine reveals the limitations of the United Nations Security Council in promoting peace in the world. Does the SG agree?
I mean, I think what I could just refer you to is what the Secretary General has said in the past about the Security Council. He's been asked this question many times, and I think, you know, we've always said the Security Council works best when it is unified and acts with unity, and of course this conflict has brought to light the problems of what happens when it is not unified. And I don't think it's a secret that Secretary General has said many times that there need to be changes in Security Council reform, but this has to be brought about by member states. Yes, Abdel Hamid.
Thank you. There are 23 countries applying to join BRICS. Does the Secretary General have any opinion on expansion of BRICS?
We have no opinion on BRICS or any other group of countries, any other grouping that is not the UN. So,
okay. My second question. Yes. Today it was revealed in Israel that they have a plan to expand the number of settlers in the occupied West Bank to 1 million settlers. Are you aware of this report, and what is your position on this large number of settlers taking over the West Bank?
Well, I had not seen this specific report. Of course, I mean, our position against settlements remains unchanged. We've been very firm in saying that they are illegal. And I think if I would refer you to Tor Venesland's statement yesterday, where he once again, condemns the expansion of these.
I want to refer to his statement, Tor Venesland, in which he treated the settlers as civilians. He condemned killing what he called father and son in Hawara. Those are settlers who are carrying guns, and he treated them just like civilians, and he called that terrorism. I want to know when the United Nations changed policy and started treating the settlers as just normal civilian people.
I think I would encourage you to ask that question to Tor Venesland himself. Thank you. Over there, please.
Hi, thank you. So I have a few questions, but they're all related.
About the what, sorry?
Mr. Pedersen this morning said
yes.
They had contact with Astana players, Western players, and Arab players. What that means, like, are they going to create a new platform for Syria peace, or like what that means? And the following questions: UN also going to be in touch with SDF for this new, I think, whatever you call it? And then the last one is, what was the Turkish response to this contact?
Okay, on the last thing, I would just encourage you to ask our Turkish colleagues on that. We can't really speak for them. And let me check with you on the other two. I would just refer you right now to what he said in his statement. I don't have anything further, but I will check. Yes. Did you have a question? Oh, you have the same. Any other questions? No? Okay, so I'll see you tomorrow, and I hope I'll have more details for you.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.